My name is Jake Oliveira, and I am a current state representative from the town of Ludlow, and I represent the 7th Hampden District in the Massachusetts House of Representatives, which includes my hometown of Ludlow, most of Belchertown, and sections of the cities of Chicopee and the city of Springfield. And I'm running for state senate because I can bring together these 12 unique communities that are in this new state senate district, the Hampden, Hampshire, and Worcester district, including the town of Granby. You know, I'm a lifelong Western Mass resident, 4 generations. My family came here and settled in Western Massachusetts from Portugal and Poland in the early 20th century in order to work in the Ludlow mills. But I decided to run for state senate because I am the only candidate in this race right now with any experience on Beacon Hill and coupled with local government experience. I serve now as a current member of the House of Representatives, where I've partnered very closely with State Senator Eric Lesser, who now represents Granby and the rest of this district in the state senate. But I also did 16 years in local government, serving as a school committee member in Ludlow for 12 years and 4 years as a rep town meeting member. Given my experience and losing, a significant amount of leadership in the state legislative delegation here in Western Massachusetts, I know I am best positioned to fight for resources for our region as our next state senator. Well, I think this district is a new district with 12 unique communities. But my overarching theme for this campaign is fighting for resources for our region, for Western Massachusetts. Our legislative delegation here in Western Mass is actually smaller than the entire Boston delegation. So we need to come to the table and speak as one voice for our region. I've done that as a state representative. I've done that as a local elected official, and I will continue to do that as a state senator. But I'm also someone who's spent a lot of time in our communities. Growing up here, representing the town of Ludlow for the last 16 years, we share a border with Granby right now, and I've spent my entire life coming to Granby, picking strawberries at Dickinson's farm, visiting local establishments that are right here, right along 202. So I know that I have the experience, the proximity, the understanding of our unique communities to be an effective advocate and voice for Western Massachusetts on Beacon Hill. I'm currently a full-time state representative, so being elected to the Massachusetts House in 2020, I represent right now the town of Ludlow, most of Belchertown, parts of Chicopee, and parts of Springfield, and it is a full-time job. You have to have someone that's committed to the issues that we care about in our region, but also someone that pays attention to the constituent service cases. So if someone has an unemployment issue or an issue with the RMV or an issue with another state agency, or they don't know where to go, whether it's to their local government or an issue with the federal government, my office, myself, will return your phone call right away and make sure we can get the resources you need in order to help help a person out with a state agency. So I've done that as a current legislator right now, and that's been my role. But prior to getting elected to the House, I worked for 12 years for the Massachusetts State Universities doing government relations for them. So that includes my alma mater of Framingham State, but also out here in Western Mass, Westfield State, Worcester State, MCLA in the Berkshires, Bridgewater, Salem, Mass Maritime, Mass Art, and Fitchburg State University. So those 9 campuses I worked for over a decade, and I spent a lot of time up on Beacon Hill fighting for resources for those institutions. Prior to working for the state universities, I actually worked in the legislature myself. I worked as a legislative aide, a legislative budget and policy director for now State Senator Mike Rodrigues, who I hope to make a colleague as we move through this election cycle. But that experience of being up on Beacon Hill for the last 16 years, working with the public colleges and universities in our state, and being a sitting legislator myself, I know I am best positioned to advocate for our region, building those relationships over the last, 15 years. Well, I think the number one issue is fighting for resources for our region and spurring economic development. Western Mass, we're a smaller area than if you go out to the eastern part of the state, but we have a lot of challenges when it comes to our infrastructure. We have a lot of challenges when it comes to reliable and equitable state funding for our region, whether it's local aid or education funding or transportation funding for our roads and bridges, but also our hidden infrastructure, our water and sewer systems, many of which are over 100 years old. Here in the town of Granby, most people are on septic systems, including right along 202 right now. We need to modernize our hidden infrastructure, our water and sewer systems, to make sure that they spur economic growth. Companies look for areas that have access to reliable water and sewer. They look to places that have reliable education and good education, whether it's at the K through 12 level or the higher education level, or at an early childhood development. That is a major issue for our region to spur economic development, but we also have to look at another hidden infrastructure, and that includes broadband, making sure that every area of the Commonwealth, particularly our rural areas, have access to affordable, high-speed, reliable internet so we can, basically, progress as a modern society in the 21st century. That's an essential public utility right now that we need to invest in. But there are also other areas that we need to look at as well. That's making sure that we spur economic growth in our region by allowing, folks to come in here to have those resources in order to build and grow their businesses. We need to support our small and micro businesses that dot a lot of our communities here in Western Massachusetts. And we also need to pay attention to the rural issues that impact a lot of communities. Granby is a part of the state Senate district. It's one of 12 communities. It's on the smaller side. And so when we look at things like education funding, I'm pretty proud that I have worked as a school committee member and as a state legislator to really call attention to rural education and provide resources for communities that are on the smaller scale right now so they can ensure that every child gets a decent quality education. Well, one of the things that I've noticed as a state legislator right now is that Western Mass can do a lot and get resources when we speak as one voice. I'm pretty proud here in Western Massachusetts that we've spoken as one voice on many issues. And when we work together, you're a member of the legislature, and on the House side, you're one of 160. On the Senate side, you're one of 40 members. In order to get things passed, you need to work together with your colleagues. You need to work in coalitions. I'm pretty proud to sponsor and co-sponsor with many of my Western Mass colleagues, so we do speak as one voice. And when we speak as one voice for our region, we have power. And so speaking on one voice when we're talking about infrastructure investments, when we're talking about reliable education funding, when we're talking about updates to our grid and our modernizing our system, that's when we get resources for our region. I have been proud to partner with many state representatives and many state senators, and I've built those relationships over the last decade and a half to make me the most effective person to advocate for our region, because I will work with my colleagues, because I will work with them to ensure that we speak as one voice in order to get equitable funding for our region. So just this past week in the legislature, we passed a very large transportation bond bill. And I'm pretty proud of Western Mass working together. As I just mentioned before, we've worked with Senator Lesser and the rest of the Western Mass delegation to ensure that West-East Rail becomes a reality. Whether you're for it or opposed it right now, the federal government is going to be investing significant amount of transportation dollars into the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. If we in Western Massachusetts do not set up the East-West Rail Authority and Commission right now and access those dollars, I fear that the MBTA, the T in the Boston area, will take much of those federal funds. So in order to make sure Western Mass gets our share of rail funding and to make West-East Rail a reality, I've been meeting on a weekly basis with a small group of legislators here in Western Massachusetts that then works with a wider group of legislators with the entire delegation to ensure that we make West-East Rail a reality. And I'm pretty proud last week that we passed a transportation bond bill that puts in $275 million of bonding funding from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and sets up a commission so we can actually access the federal dollars to lay down the tracks and ensure that we make West-East Rail a reality. One of my biggest priorities when we have these conversations about West-East Rail is ensuring that we not only have a Springfield stop here in Western Massachusetts, but we also have a Palmer stop. The Palmer stop is essential for the University of Massachusetts, for Granby, for Belchertown to access the rail that will be coming and stretching from the Berkshires all the way to Boston. And so I'm proud that we have language that was included within the bond bill that I fought very hard to include that mentions the Palmer stop that's in the bond bill right now. So I am wholeheartedly supporting West-East Rail. We are right on the cusp right now of making it a reality, and I will continue the partnerships that I have already built to make sure we get the commission set up so that we can access the federal funds and that West-East Rail becomes part of our infrastructure here in Western Massachusetts. So here in Massachusetts, we're fortunate enough to have some of the lowest rates of gun deaths out of all 50 states. I think Hawaii might be a little bit lower than we are right now, but that's because of the common sense gun laws that we have on the books here in Massachusetts. And the disastrous Supreme Court decision that came out just over a month ago that really struck down a New York law on concealed carry, we've been able to bolster that here in Massachusetts by working working together as a legislature. You know, protecting and making sure that the citizens of the Commonwealth can live and grow their families here is essential right now. But we need to balance that with the Second Amendment right that has been that is enshrined by the Supreme Court. However, we can do things to protect people. We can strengthen our red flag laws here in Massachusetts, which are fairly strong here right now. We can do things to get the guns away from people that have severe mental health issues. That's something that's really important. In our mental health bill that we passed just this last session, we put in place some provisions that will advertise and get out the word about the red flag laws that are on the books right now, and to ensure that Massachusetts residents who are suffering from mental health issues don't have firearms. I think that's essential to protecting Massachusetts residents, to protecting our school children. But the epidemic of gun violence that's stretching across our nation right now is something that we need to end. And here in Massachusetts, we have common sense gun laws that we are strengthening right now to ensure that people are protected from gun violence. So right now we have a historic opportunity to invest in our human capital here in Massachusetts, our students, our infrastructure. You know, Massachusetts right now ranks 48th or 49th in the nation in funding and the quality of our roads and bridges right now. We need to utilize those dollars to reinvest in our roadways and our rail systems here in Western Massachusetts, but also invest in our education system. You know, we have a great K through 12 high-performing system of education for the K through 12 side here in Massachusetts. However, we rank 48th in per capita spending for public higher education. That means right now that we have some of the most expensive public colleges and universities. And I'm not just talking about UMass or state universities, I'm talking about our community colleges as well. And so students that are going to get a certificate to be a plumber, to be an electrician, to be in the trades, they're taking on this massive amount of student debt because we haven't invested in our public higher education system. 2/3 of high school graduates here in Massachusetts, when they graduate, go to one of our 29 public colleges and universities. And right now, we have an opportunity to invest in that education system to ensure that we bring the costs down, that we create a debt-free future for our students, but also it's good for our economy here in Massachusetts because 85% of public higher ed graduates stay, work, and live in Massachusetts after they graduate. But it's also important to point out, aside from investing in our education and our transportation system, also about looking at ways in which we can modernize our tax code. Unfortunately, this session we didn't pass over the finish line just yet. Changes to our tax code, including modernizing our estate tax system, which has the lowest threshold right now. So we have plans in the works to raise that threshold to ensure that people aren't caught in a gap right now of a tax bracket that, you know, originally when these laws came on the books, that they weren't even, you know, considering that the middle class would fall into that bracket. And so changing the tax code that way is very important, but also returning money back to working families and to people who have dependents and children. You know, expanding the earned income tax credit that goes out to working families, making sure that we expand the dependency tax credit that goes to families that have children or dependents living in their households, and making sure that we protect our seniors. Seniors as well deserve tax relief, and there are provisions right now to expand the senior circuit breaker tax credit that I hope will be included in future tax packages, and if it doesn't get over the finish line this session, that will be first on the agenda come January of 2023. But we also at the same time have an opportunity right now to receive a lot of federal dollars that can help us supplement the state dollars that are going to go into our infrastructure spending. So all of that to say that the Commonwealth is a very fiscally sound Commonwealth right now. We have money coming in, but we also want to make sure that we spend that money in a fiscally responsible way to maximize investments and spur further job growth through all regions of the Commonwealth, particularly here in Western Massachusetts. Well, first off, this issue is very personal to me. I am a son of an educator, a current teacher. My dad is a high school math teacher in the Ludlow Public Schools. He happens to be the oldest teacher in the Ludlow Public School system right now at 73, and he's still going strong. But I know from firsthand, from talking to my dad, but also talking to many of my friends who are teachers, that the past 2.5 years have been extraordinarily difficult on our educators. Right now, Massachusetts is known as an education state because we invest in our K through 12 system, but we invest in our teachers as well, and we need to continue to do so. Our teachers right now have worked so hard over the pandemic, putting in their own money into teaching supplies, putting in their own money to make sure that the students that they serve get a quality education and have the resources to thrive. But we need to return that favor to our teachers as well by paying them a decent wage, which is reliant upon consistent state funding. I'm pretty proud that as a member of the school committee and now as a state legislator, I fought very hard to put in place the Student Opportunity Act, which will invest billions of dollars in our K through 12 systems and our communities here in Western Massachusetts, particularly our urban areas. But we do need to make changes to help a lot of our rural school districts, which Granby falls under right now. And so there is actually a report that just came out this summer that is looking at rural education and ways in which the Commonwealth can support it, so we can help our teachers, so we can bolster our teachers, so they can provide a quality education to all of our students that are going through our school systems right now. I'm looking forward to, as a state senator, to really taking the recommendations that are within that rural schools report and then making the investments that are necessary to ensure that school districts like Granby get the resources they need in order to support their teachers, but also in turn to support their students as well. But there are other areas in which we can help our teachers as well. Massachusetts is one of only a handful of states right now that has a windfall provision for retirement. And so if a teacher that is working for numerous years in a different profession goes into teaching, they'll likely never get a retirement that is great enough for them to kind of live on their own. They rely on the Social Security that they get as well. And so right now, if they retire, their Social Security is hit by their retirement system here in Massachusetts. That's a federal change that needs to occur right now because we want to encourage people to get into the teaching profession, particularly if they have experience in other professions beforehand. That's essential for our vocational educators right now, people that work in the trades. If they come into teaching, they're disincentivized to come into teaching because they will be hit on their Social Security once they retire. So changing those provisions so we can get more teachers into our pipeline right now to educate our students is essential. But we also need to do things to rework the way that we actually license and get credentials for our educators here in Massachusetts. The MTEL exam, which is a high-stake test that every teacher needs to take in order to get their licensure to teach in Massachusetts, is a high-stakes test that really tells less about how effective a teacher is going to be, instead tells more how they perform on a test. So looking at alternative pathways for educators to go into the profession and to get their licensure is something that we're working on right now in Mass General Laws to provide alternative pathways so we can get more paraprofessionals who are working as teacher aides right now to get them credentialed to go into the teaching profession, and to encourage more people of color to get into the teaching profession as well, because it's shown that students who have an educator in front of them that looks like them usually perform better. And so reforming the way that we do our teacher credentialing system is essential to growing that pipeline, coupled with providing more resources for our school districts. These decisions by the Supreme Court are disastrous across the board. I'll start first with the reversal of Roe just a couple of months ago. So Massachusetts, and I'm proud to say that I voted just a couple weeks ago to make sure that we expand and protect women's reproductive rights and gender-affirming care here in Massachusetts. We passed a bill this past session that is very comprehensive, that is expanding access to reproductive care for residents of the Commonwealth, but also protecting those that are coming in from out of state right now that, as a result of this disastrous Supreme Court decision, are forced to come to states like Massachusetts and other states around the country that are protecting, enshrining, and expanding reproductive rights. So that was a bill that I was very proud to partner up with members of the Western Mass delegation on, but we need to do more in that regard as well. There are these pregnancy crisis centers that are popping up all across Massachusetts right now that are providing false information to women. We need to crack down on them to dispel the misinformation that's getting out into the public that's out there, and that's all part of it. But we in Massachusetts are protecting, enshrining, and expanding a woman's right to choose here in Massachusetts. I will continue to expand that right as a state senator, but I'm proud of taking votes right now to actually expand those rights as a current state representative. That is a disastrous decision by the Supreme Court. Looking at the gun rights decision that came out by the Supreme Court as well, we've taken steps in Massachusetts to make sure that we strengthen our concealed carry laws here in Massachusetts to prevent people that should not have firearms from having access to them, but also the other decisions that are that have been so disastrous as well. The education decisions that really hasn't been getting a lot of play right now, basically saying that a state can provide funding to private religious schools here in Massachusetts on the taxpayer dollar. We need to stop that practice and push back and have state laws that protect our state from a lot of the Supreme Court decisions that are disastrous. And then on the environment, here in Massachusetts, I'm very proud that we have taken steps to be a climate leader. We have set up a climate roadmap here in Massachusetts that will get us to net zero by 2050. Just this past week in the legislature, we passed a comprehensive climate bill that actually ends the practice of subsidizing wood-burning biomass, which is disastrous for Western Massachusetts and particularly the city of Springfield, which was ranked as the asthma capital of the world for many years and now dropped down to, I think, number 9 or 10. However, there are ways in which we can bolster it by investing in clean energy. Within that climate bill that we took up just a couple weeks ago, we are expanding wind energy, offshore wind, and we are expanding our renewable energy resources here in Western Massachusetts to end our dependency on fossil fuels, which continues to pollute our environment and really is our greatest existential threat as a country and as a world. So all of these things by the decisions of the Supreme Court have an impact on us here in Massachusetts, but our state legislators, our local elected officials have been pushing back against those decisions. All of these decisions tells one thing, that who you elect to the state houses and to the state senates that we have throughout this nation is essential to push back against some of these disastrous decisions by the court. A part of what we've experimented with over the last couple of years through the pandemic is showing that remote meetings and hybrid meetings actually do work. And so even though that there is a cost to municipalities, providing the state resources in order to help the municipalities run these hybrid and remote platforms are so important for kind of public participation in meetings right now. So I'll use for example, and it doesn't just affect municipalities alone, but it also affects things like collaborative boards. So Granby is part of the Collaborative for Educational Services, which is based out of Northampton, which has dozens of school districts throughout Western Massachusetts right now, and people need to drive sometimes over an hour to get to these meetings. Having a hybrid and a virtual option is so important for these boards to actually operate right now, but it's also important for statewide boards and is actually an equity piece for us here in Western Massachusetts. So take, for example, committee hearings in the legislature. If you wanted to testify, so in Massachusetts, every bill gets a public hearing in Massachusetts where you can go to the State House and testify on any bill that's before the legislature. Before 2.5 years ago, you had to spend, basically an hour and a half or 2 hours or 2.5 hours one direction to get into Boston to testify on a bill. Now, because we've provided hybrid and remote options to residents of the Commonwealth, you can participate in these meetings from your home in Western Massachusetts, which is actually empowering Western Massachusetts to participate in their democracy more at the state level, but it also allows us to participate more in statewide boards and commissions that tend to be physically located in the Boston area. But on the municipal level, whether it's the select boards, whether it's school committees, whether it's planning boards or boards of health, having these options for remote meetings is essential to making sure that, number one, we allow people to participate and we allow the public to see and participate in these meetings as well, even if they can't physically be there, but it needs to be coupled with state support. And the bills that have been moved through the legislature right now have coupled a lot of these options of hybrid and remote meetings to actually couple them with state support to ensure that local communities have additional dollars in order to provide these options. I'm also pretty proud to say that we've had a historic investment in local aid in the last budget cycle as well. Some of the highest level and historic levels of investment to our communities are coming in from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which will help communities provide these options as well. I've dedicated my life to public service, whether it's an elective office, whether it's giving back to my community as a volunteer, whether it's serving on a board or commission. I'm confident that I will be the next state senator for this district. However, if I am unsuccessful, Western Mass has always been my home, and I've always given back as much as I can, whether it's sitting on a local board or commission, whether it's sitting in a nonprofit sector to ensure that people have access to quality education, that have access to the things that I'm passionate about. There are so many ways that you can serve your community without being in an elective office. However, this is a historic opportunity to serve in the state Senate. And given my background as a local elected official, as someone that's been in this community, our communities for my entire life, but also someone who couples that with the experience on Beacon Hill, I know that I can serve my community best as your next state senator. However, there are ways in which you can serve your community. Former President Barack Obama said the most important role in government is not the President of the United States. It's not a U.S. Senator or Congressman. It's not a state legislator who's running for state Senate or for state representative or a governor or even your local elected officials. The most important role in government is the role of citizen. That's participating in your democracy. That's showing up to vote. That's asking people to support issues that you care about. That is the most important role in our democracy. And if I am to return, back to if I'm not returned to the State House, then I will continue to be active in the most important role in our government, and that's the important role as a citizen. Now, I'd just like to say just thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit more about why I'm running for this state Senate seat. But Granby in this new state Senate seat is one of 12 communities that are in the district, from South Hadley to Granby to Belchertown to Ludlow to Palmer to Warren to Wilbraham to Hamden to East Longmeadow to Longmeadow and portions of the cities of Chicopee and Springfield. Granby is an important part of this district because it is a crossroads. You know, it's connected by 202 to both, you know, the lower Pioneer Valley and the Amherst and Northampton area. Granby is an essential part of this district, and even though it's one of the smaller communities in this district, I plan to be present on all of your events that you have here. I'm looking forward to representing the community. I'm proud to have the support of several members of the Granby community, including the chair of the Democratic Town Committee here and former Select Board member, Mark Bale, who's been a strong advocate. But my support here in Granby has been wonderful, and I've been so happy to get to know the community even more over the last few months, particularly knocking on doors and talking to voters right on their doorstep, and I will continue to do that right through Election Day, and I'm looking forward to representing this community as your next state senator.